Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Playing It Tough by Amy Andrews, narrated by Brie Jackman. Chapter 1. Ronan Dempsey was playing shit rugby. Sure, his brand of shit rugby was still better than half the current players in the Australian Professional League, but that was beside the point. And if he didn't want to find his ass on a plane back to Colorado, not to mention foregoing a spot on the USA Rugby Sevens Olympic team, he needed to fix that ASAP. He'd come a long way from the chubby kid who'd never been picked for anything, and he was never going back. So he needed to stop burning the candle at both ends because clearly it was finally catching up with him. Playing for the Sydney Smoke had earned Ronan more money this past 4 months than he'd have earned playing for several years back home, and he'd been like a kid in a candy shop. A candy shop owned, run and populated by women. Man, he loved Aussie women, and they, praise the Lord, really loved him. But there were only 2 months left till final season, and if he wanted to help the Sydney Smoke get there, if he wanted to show the selectors back home what he was made of, he had to cut out the distractions. "Hey, Ronan, you want to go on a date with a friend of Em's?" Lincoln Quinn asked as the team filed into the locker room, collectively sweaty and exhausted after another grueling session with their hard-as-nails coach, Griffin King. "She's just split with some dickwad and is looking for some light entertainment." Light entertainment was Ronan's specialty, but finals, Olympic glory. Nah. He shook his head. Decision made. "I've taken a celibacy pledge." Abstaining from sex before a game or a competition was hardly new in elite sports circles. This was just going a little further. There was a moment of stunned silence before everyone, every last guy on the team, laughed. "Sure," Tanner Stone, team skipper, said when the laughter finally died down. "Me too." "Me three," country boy Ryder Davis added. Donovan Bain, the man-giant with the blood of Maori warriors running through his veins, shook his head. "For a guy that's been planting his American flagpole everywhere since he arrived, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard." Ronan grinned, letting the smack talk run off his shoulders. Could he help it if women over here found his accent irresistible? "Just doing my best for Aussie-US relations." Donovan snorted. "Is that what you're telling your mama?" Ronan hauled his shirt off over his head and tossed it aside. "I'm telling her I'm going to church every Sunday and saving myself for a nice American girl." Everyone laughed as they too shucked off sweaty clothes. "What's this pledge all about then?" Link asked as he sat on the bench situated beneath the row of lockers and eased out of his boots. "You suddenly allergic?" Bodie Webb winced. "That's not good for the junk. Swollen and not in the good way. Itchy." "A rash," Dexter Blake threw in for good measure. "Yeah, a rash anywhere near your dick is not something women appreciate," Carl Layton confirmed. He was married to Valerie King, the coach's daughter. The tone of his voice left none of them in any doubt that the fathers of the women didn't really appreciate it either. Ronan ignored them. "Just want to channel everything into the game this next couple of months." "Yeah, well, wait till you take your first hit to those blue balls," Ryder said with a grimace. "Hey," Link reasoned, performing a lewd action with his hand. "He didn't say he wasn't going to love himself." "As long as he can still catch a ball," Tanner said dryly. He eyed Donovan. You were celibate for years. You'll have to teach Ronan the ropes." As a gay man playing elite football, Donovan had forsaken romantic relationships rather than risk the secret he'd been keeping. But, recently out, he was all loved up with Beckett. Donovan grunted. "I ain't touching his ropes." There was more schoolboy sniggering. "I give it a week," Link pronounced. "Fuck no." Bodie shook his head. "I'll give him 3 days." "You care to wager on that?" Link challenged. And then they were off. Bemused, Ronan listened as his team upped the ante on his ability to go without. "Y'all seriously think I can't be celibate?" Dex snorted at Ronan's serious question. "I live next door to a randy cocker spaniel. It humps anything not moving, and some things that are. That dog has more of a chance at celibacy than you." There was much hilarity at that observation, which was really starting to piss Ronan off. It was sex, not oxygen. He'd survive without it for a couple of months. Longer, if they got into the top 8. "Fine." Ronan was done with the banter. "You're on." He glanced around the locker room at each red, sweaty face. "I bet each and every one of you unsupportive assholes $100 that I can abstain from sex." He held up his hand to quell Link as he opened his mouth, no doubt seeking clarification. "With a woman until the end of the season." "And what proof are you going to give us?" Lincoln demanded. Ronan grinned. Link didn't like to lose. "You're just gonna have to take my word for it. Unless you want to low-jack me." "We'll know," Donovan declared, his voice soft but authoritative. "Yep," Tanner nodded. "If he's anything like Link used to be, he won't be able to stop bragging about it." "That's true," Bodie murmured. Ryder stood from where he'd been sitting near his locker and crossed the room to clap Ronan on the shoulder. "Good luck, man. If you could last 2 weeks and 3 days, I'd appreciate it. I'm all in for $300. "Which is more in than Ronan's going to be for a while," Bodie quipped, and Dex high-fived him. Ronan shook his head. Let them have their fun. He'd never backed out on a pledge, and he wasn't about to start. He'd spent 19 out of his 25 years going without sex. He could last a couple of fucking months, and he'd channel his pent-up sexual energy into the game. They thought Ronan Dempsey, pumped full of adrenaline and bristling with ego, was a sight to behold. Wait till they saw Ronan Dempsey with a pledge to uphold. Orla Stewart was not prepared to tackle an intruder this afternoon. She was, however, in the mood for it. She'd had an emotionally draining day at work. An emotionally draining life, really. And a bitch of a headwind as she'd run along the clifftop path to her current residence. So, launching herself at some dude who was jiggling the crap out of the pool room door at the rear of the property gave her focus for the rage she'd been carrying for a very long time. Most people would have taken one look at the size of the guy who was now peering in through the glass panels embedded in the door and called the police. Orla Stewart was not most people. At 28, she'd been mad at life for 2 decades. She'd also spent a few years dabbling in MMA. "I don't think so, buddy," she growled as she took the last 2 stairs in one leap, shrugging off her backpack as she launched herself at him. Startled, the guy reared back, but it was too late. She shoulder-charged him, hitting him square in the chest, sweeping his legs out from under him. He toppled backward, felled like a tree. A big, solid hunk of a tree who flailed, grabbing at air and finding her, then dragging her down with him. The breath whooshed from her lungs with an oof as he hit the unforgiving astroturf. Orla had been celibate, largely anyway, for the last 3 years. And whilst she occasionally missed dick and being held while she orgasmed, she hadn't missed all the male neediness and complications that came with anyone attached to a penis. Sprawled all over this mass of masculinity, every millimetre of muscle taut, the slam of his heart vibrating beneath her ribs, she couldn't for the life of her remember why. He was big, and clearly some kind of criminal. 2 things that should be setting the spidey sense every girl was raised to hone wildly on edge. Yet they weren't. Not in that way, anyway. His eyes flashed open, a stark, clear blue, and Orla sucked in a breath as they stared at each other for a stunned moment. Unfortunately, instead of wanting to knee him in the groin, that big, warm hand pressed into the exposed skin at the small of her back made her want to do things to his groin that people who only just met didn't do. Unless there was money exchanging hands. Jesus, lady. He grabbed the back of his head, flattening the uber-short spikes of his blonde buzz cut. What the fuck? It was all the impetus Orla needed to scramble off, his hand sliding easily away as she sprang to her feet, tugging her baggy t-shirt back in place. She reached for the net leaning against the outer wall of the pool house. Its long handle enabled her to keep her distance as she jabbed it in his direction whilst whipping her phone out of the hip pocket of her lycra leggings. "Don't move," she barked. "I'm calling the cops." She needed to get him the hell off her property, lest she take total leave of her senses and make him, a stranger who was breaking into her house, a completely improper offer. If she'd had ovaries, they'd be popping champagne corks about now. Move? He huffed as he gingerly lowered his head to the ground. "Lady, I think you paralyzed me. Coach is going to be pissed." 2 things Orla immediately noticed. 1, her phone was dead, which she'd forgotten in the confusion and rush of adrenaline. And 2, the big blonde blue-eyed guy sprawled on the astroturf was American. Oh, and 3, Coach? Orla shoved her phone back into her pocket. Now what? "Why the hell are you breaking into the pool house?" she demanded. There was absolutely nothing of any value there. In the main house, however, were several pieces of art that could easily be hocked for thousands. Sophia, the owner, had an eye for quality and a matching expense account. "I'm staying here for a few days." Orla jabbed the net at him again. "Nice try, buddy. I'd know if you were staying. I live here, and I've had a really draining day, so you and your bullshit are the last things I need." He glanced disparagingly at the makeshift weapon he could probably snap like a twig. The fact he hadn't tried, despite his disadvantage, was admirable. His sexy, light brown eyebrows drew together in a V. Wait, no. Not sexy. Since when were eyebrows sexy? "You're Orla Stewart?" The fact he knew her name cranked up Orla's level of pissed off. Or maybe it was more his disappointed tone, like she hadn't met his expectations. It was true. She wasn't some raving beauty with huge bazongas and more curves than a country road. She was interesting, had no breasts, and a body that was straight up and down. Somehow, that made her crankier. She made another jab in the direction of his throat. His very nice, lightly whiskered throat. "I ask the questions around here, buddy." He glanced at the pool net again and grimaced. "Yes, ma'am." Oh, God. Orla swallowed. He'd ma'amed her. She'd been ma'amed a lot when she'd lived in the US, and it had always made her a little weak below the belly button, especially when a man drew it out in that cowboy kind of way. She'd missed it, And now he was smiling at her, just a little, like he knew how it affected her, and that was really bloody annoying. Who are you, and why, if you're supposed to be staying here, are you breaking in? My name is Ronan Dempsey, and I wasn't breaking in. I have a key. He pointed over her shoulder at the door. It just doesn't seem to work. I think I might have been given the wrong one. Or you're in the wrong place. But he knew her name, and a quick flick to her left confirmed he did have a key. Sophia said she'd contacted you about it? Orla glared at him for a beat or two more before she slowly lowered the pool net and took a step away from him. He knew her name and Sophia's name and had the key. So his story probably checked out. Sophia did, after all, randomly offer the pool house to people when the whim took her. But Orla was still going to treat this guy like a pet crocodile until she could confirm. "Stay here," she commanded. "I'm going to check it out." She pointed up at the big windows lining the back deck of the 2-story house overlooking the gardens and the pool. "I can see you from the house, and if you take so much as a foot in my direction, my first phone call will be to the cops." He held his hands up in a surrender motion. "Yes, ma'am." Another small smile, and Orla narrowed her eyes at him as she backed away. Smug prick. Grabbing her backpack, she turned toward the house, hyper-aware of the hot sear of his gaze on her ass as she detoured around the pool fence and took the wide stairs to the deck, 2 at a time. Pulling the key out of the front zipper of the bag, Orla let herself in and within 20 seconds had plugged in her phone. Sure enough, after it powered up, there were several texts from Sophia and a voicemail. "Hey kiddo, my bestie's boy Ronan needs a place to crash for a while. Something about his apartment being temporarily evacuated. Anyway, it should only be for a couple of days. He might be there when you get home, but he said he won't bother you." Orla almost laughed out loud. She'd known the boy for only 10 minutes, and she was seriously bothered. She stood at the window watching Ronan as Sophia prattled in her ear about him playing pro rugby for the Sydney Smoke. He'd moved to sit on the bench seat attached to the outside wall of the pool house, and he should have looked ridiculous with mermaids cavorting in the mural on the wall behind his head, but he didn't. His feet were flat on the ground, and he was leaning forward at the hips, those big shoulders in line with his knees, meaty forearms pressed against thighs that were spread wide in that lord and master way of men, and his shorts had ridden up to expose a good chunk of toned quads. Yeah, Ronan hadn't been a boy for a long time. Their gazes met across the distance of pool and gardens and locked. For long moments, Orla just stared, compelled by a force she didn't understand, as Sophia talked about the weather in Rome. Orla had travelled for a lot of years and met a lot of guys, slept with a lot of them too, but she'd never met one like this, who made her excruciatingly aware that she was female. "So you should definitely have a bit of fun with that boy while you can." Orla dragged her eyes off Ronan and tuned back in to Sophia. It seemed the woman had switched to her favourite topic, getting Orla laid. "Yes, I know you're sworn off sex these days." Sophia had been horrified about the celibacy thing, and Orla could practically hear her shudder. "But, kiddo, if he's half as capable in bed as he is on the field, you will thank me for it. And yes, I will absolutely deny pimping out my bestie's son should she ever find out about this." Despite everything, Orla smiled at Sophia's flair for the dramatic. "Look, all I'm saying is that every woman should have a chance at some downtime with a guy who wouldn't ordinarily be in their orbit. and he'll be gone in a jiffy, so you'll never have to see him again, which makes him perfect. And seriously, regret sucks. Don't do that to yourself. Orla was well versed in the suckiness of regret. Hell, for an entire decade she'd set about ensuring she'd have zero of the suckers should her horrible genetics finally win out. She glanced across at Ronan again, sitting like he was freaking king of the pool house, as Sophia's message came to an end with a casual ciao bella. Like she hadn't just planted a truly terrible idea in Orla's head. Pushing the end button, Orla's hand fell to her side. One very fine male eyebrow quirked up as if to say, "Well?" And she sighed. If this was her house, she'd send Ronan and his weird, freaky male vibes on his way. But it wasn't. She was just the house-sitter. Orla stepped outside, walking to where the deck met the stairs. "You can stay," she said, raising her voice slightly. He waited for a beat or two before nodding. "Yes, ma'am." Chapter 2. A couple of hours later, Ronan was unpacking groceries into the bar fridge of the kitchenette. He was pretty much set up now. Sophia's pool house was more granny flat than storage shed. Sure, at one end there was a pile of outdoor furniture stacked Tetris style, some shelves with chemicals and other pool necessities, as well as 2 large baskets full of inflatable toys. But the other end consisted of a double bed, a wall-hung TV, a kitchenette, and a small bathroom. Perfect for a few days. Extra points for its proximity to Bronte Beach. Sophia Marino had been his mother's best friend since they'd roomed together at college after Sophia had moved to the US to study. Ronan knew her reasonably well from the time she'd visited them in Colorado over the years, and had caught up with her twice in Sydney before she'd left on one of her frequent overseas jaunts as an art buyer for a major city gallery. He just hadn't expected to ever be ensconced in her pool house. But his mother had rung at exactly the moment everyone in his apartment block had been given an hour's notice to leave, since cracks had appeared in the outer walls of their building the day before yesterday. And despite his protestations that he'd find somewhere to crash, she had insisted on ringing Sophia, and within 15 minutes it had all been set up. Knowing how much his mom missed him and worried about him, Ronan had acquiesced. It was a small thing to do to keep her happy, and it was only for a few days. They'd been told they'd be back in their apartments by Thursday. Easy, right? And then he'd been thrown on his ass by a pink-haired hellion. Absently, he felt the tender spot on the back of his head as he pondered how the hell that had happened. 1 minute he'd been upright, trying to open the door. Apparently there was a trick to it. The next, a streak of fiery pink had crash-tackled him. That part he hadn't minded, apart from the bang to his head and the fact that he'd been taken down by a girl. No, a woman. Definitely a woman. Her cropped platinum pink hair had reminded him of cotton candy, and she'd smelled kinda sweet, too. She'd certainly felt sweet, smooshed up against him in those few seconds it had taken for them to recover from the jolt. Her shirt had ridden up a little at the back, exposing a swathe of warm, bare skin, and his palm had tingled at the contact. He'd liked the way his hand had spanned that low dip. He'd liked it a lot. And the way she'd lingered for a beat, her eyelids momentarily fluttering? Yeah, he liked that, too. Great. 6 hours into his celibacy pledge, and he was already being tempted by a woman who had knocked him to the ground, then menaced him with a plastic long-handled pool net. Not the standard reaction he was used to from women. Not since he'd started playing elite rugby, anyway. His eldest sister, he had 4 of them, had informed him that one day he'd meet a woman who wouldn't fall at his feet, and apparently that was today, which should have been enough to keep him in the pool house. His celibacy pledge and the bet should have been more reason. But Orla Stewart intrigued him. And maybe they'd just got off on the wrong foot? He should, at the very least, apologize for frightening her, even if he'd had permission to be there. It would only be neighbourly to make amends. Grabbing the 6-pack of beer he'd just placed in the fridge, Ronan left the granny flat and followed the route Orla had taken earlier today as she'd hightailed it into the house. It was dark at almost 7 in the middle of July, but strategically planted lights amidst the garden beds lit his path. Climbing the 6 wide stairs, he made his way to the sliding glass door. It was open, but the screen door was shut. "Hello," he called. "Orla, are you home?" She was home. Ronan could see the distant glow of a light through the darkened house, and the soft harmonizing of Simon and Garfunkel floated through the screen. And besides, he could sense her presence in his bones. Just when he was about to give up, her voice drifted out. "Around the front. Use the side path." Ronan descended the stairs, then followed the brick path that led off to the left. It took him along a narrow strip of land between the outside wall of the house and the property boundary. A stiff breeze coming from the ocean slapped him in the face as the path opened into a neatly mowed front yard that sloped down to a low white picket fence. Beyond that was the one-way road, bordered each side by parallel car parks, which had been full when he'd first arrived, disgorging occupants eager for a piece of the view, or to walk along the renowned cliff-top path that linked Bondi to Coogee. He couldn't see much beyond the street lighting, but Ronan could hear the roar of the waves tumbling against the rocks at the foot of those nearby cliffs as he crossed to the stairs. He could even taste the salt on his tongue, which was only making him think of other things he could taste on his tongue. Sweeter things. "Hey!" Her voice came out at him from the deep shadows of the deck as Ronan took the stairs. She was at the end, sitting in a low chair, her legs propped up on protruding wooden extensions. "Hey." She was in jeans now, he noted, and an unzipped hoodie, the hood sitting bunched behind her neck. A glimpse of a light shirt sat loose against a flat stomach. He halted a few feet away, near a similar chair, and held out the 6-pack. "Truce?" She quirked an eyebrow. "We're at war?" He shrugged. For some reason, her reaction to him had felt more like resentment than inconvenience, which was an adjustment for a guy people usually liked straight off the bat. Ronan's gaze searched her face. He knew from his close encounter with her earlier that her eyes were a stormy kind of grey, or maybe that had just been a reflection of her state of mind. Her cheekbones were prominent, as were the hollows beneath, and he was sure if she ever smiled, her generous mouth would curve very nicely. "I feel like we definitely got off on the wrong foot," he said as he took in the tips of her platinum pink hair that were longer on top and had been styled to sit up in some kind of messy finger-tousled style. Ronan knew jack about hair stuff, but the punk pixie look suited her face. That's one way of putting it. A ghost of a smile touched her mouth. "I owe you an apology. I thought you knew about me." "It's fine." She waved her hand dismissively. "It was a misunderstanding. I'm sorry for tackling you like that." Don't worry about it. He smiled then, because she seemed...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?